think we need to quickly discuss the scientific method, because it's something that I think is misunderstood a lot. It's to counterpoint, I guess, to be the opposite of just our intuitive sense. When we just use our intuition to figure things out, if we just kind of say, oh, if I press this button, then the computer turns on, or if I walk this way to my house, then it's the quickest way, or whatever, we tend to make mistakes. And, we're only human, but the scientific method is a way to be a lot more sure about the things that we figure out, make sure that they are true. Because, we've had many mistakes historically. Like, people, used to think the world was flat. Just intuitively, it looks flat. Why not? And we found that to be false, and they thought that maggots would spawn magically from rotten meat. And, we can see why they would think that, but it turned out not to be true. So the first step of the scientific method is we need a hypothesis. Hypothesis, I think, is how you spell that. And so this, really at the core of this is it's just a question. You have to phrase it as a statement. You have to say, if this happens, then the other thing will be the result. But really, the stem of this is you have to be able to ask a good question. You have to say, rather than if I throw the ball, where will it land, is kind of a simple question. But if the real deep question that could be asked is, if I throw the ball, does the ball have any choice where it lands? Is it all determined right here, and then the rest of it is predetermined? And that's the kind of fundamental question that people like Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein were really good at coming up with. They questioned the things that we thought we knew, and they had good hypotheses. So, you have to phrase it as an if-then statement. If, if whatever your condition is, then, the other thing. So, if we give this input, then reality will give this output back to us. And that's the hypothesis step. And then the next step is you formulate an experiment. Sometimes I've heard 5 steps, I've heard different numbers, but experiment. The basic core things are always the same. Experiment is definitely one. And the way that we go about experimenting with something, like the ideal perfect experiment would be to just do something and then turn back time, just reset, and then do it again and see if anything changed. Like that would be perfect, but we can't do that. So the next best thing we can do is to control all the other factors. So, if we're testing out, I don't know, I guess the ball thing, we would have to throw the ball with the exact same speed at the exact same angle. So rather than using a person, we would have to have like one of those ball thrower things, and so then we would calibrate it to make sure that it released at the exact same speed, and that the angle was the same, and that the temperature of the air was the same, and everything else. And then we could, that would be the controlled experiment. So it's kind of like hitting reset. Everything stays the same, so we can actually identify things. And then the dependent variable would be where the ball lands. So if we were going to change something, if we vary the speed, we could do it once at 5 miles per hour, and then again at 10 miles per hour, and then at 15. And then we could say, okay, so at 5 it lands here, at 10 it lands there, at 15 it lands here, and then we'd have input and outputs. We could say, if we increase the speed, then the ball will land further away. That's just a physics example, but it could be applied for just about anything. So we have the experiment, and we just have to control it really tightly. And there's different types of experiments. Like sometimes you can just observe in the wild. Like if you're trying to do experiments on animals and things especially, you can't always, We can't say if we if we do really mean things to animals, then they will get mad at us. That's unethical, and we're just not allowed to do that. So ideally, we would make an experiment. And then the next step is we gather results. I guess I'll read for results. And this is kind of tricky. We have to be precise, so we have to measure from, I don't know, we'll say from the front of the cannon to the first X. And then if the next time we measure from the back of the cannon to this X, then we're going to have weird results. So that's, we have to be consistent in our measurements, and we have to be objective. We can't just say this one landed close, and this one landed far, and this one landed farthest. We have to use actual numbers, and we have to be really objective. Because otherwise we could, if we had some kind of bias, if we were trying to prove a certain thing, then we might come up with the wrong result because of our own opinions about it. But, numbers never lie. So if we use concrete numbers here, then we avoid that whole problem. And then we interpret. The last step, notice, or almost the last, is interpret after we do everything else. And, that's when we kind of say, well, as this number increases, the distance increases, and so then we kind of get a graph, and we draw a better graph. So then we can say they're positively correlated. And that's when we kind of say, oh look, we were right. Our hypothesis of if this then that was true, or we could say it was false if it turns out that we get the opposite. And you can't be ashamed for being wrong. At least you know now. If people never did these things, we would still be in the dark ages. So I don't know, I guess I could put results and numbers. And then the last step, or at least I think so, yeah, that's 5, is to have it replicated or reviewed. And there's sort of this saying in science that if it happens once, it didn't happen at all. So you have to, have peer review, it's called, and people say, well, it looks like you were really thorough in your measurements, and it looks like you had a good experiment, and you took good results, and I agree with your interpretation. But that's not always good enough. They have to replicate it. And that means that if someone on the other side of the country or the other side of the world tries to do your experiment, they should, maybe they have a different brand of pitching machine, but if they use the same speeds and they still have a level surface and everything else, if they replicate your experiments, they should replicate your results. And those are the 5 steps that you commonly see. They sometimes use different words, but that's the core of it. It all starts with an idea, and that's kind of the spark of you saying, oh, I wonder if the world is flat. Maybe it isn't. And one important thing to note is that even though we go through all this rigorous process and try to make completely sure that we know things, I'm putting know in quotation marks, because everything that we know is just, we haven't proven it wrong yet. Like, we have really, really solid things that we consider true, like the germ theory of disease, which it's being held up by a lot of evidence, but really it's still just a theory. We haven't found any evidence that refutes it, and all it takes is one little fact, and the entire thing would unravel. If we found, I think a good example of this is the theory of evolution. We can't say it's true yet, and we can't say it's false until we find something that can't be explained. And I think we have sort of a good idea of what would refute it, and we haven't found it yet. But if we find some fossil that just doesn't fit in with the whole, we have a branching kind of hierarchy of bacteria, and we get to whatever they branch off. But if we found something that would belong over here, completely separated from the rest of the branch, then we could say, oh, that really doesn't make sense through evolution. We have to start over. So, that's the scientific method. Use it.